your stomach. Put your arms out. You understand you're under arrest? Go ahead. I can't breathe.
Breathe.
I can't breathe.
Breathe.
I can't breathe.
Breathe there. Breathe there.
All the hate and all the killings. Everybody in their feelings. Everybody got opinions. They say blame it on the system. Yeah, we angry, so we protest. Spend that stimulus money, you ain't broke yet. Be in church on Sunday morning like you so blessed. Them black lives don't matter more than they agenda. Our seeds deserve better than your matrix. Oppressed by the same people that enslaved us. $1 trillion question, daddy, why they hate us? They say colorism, baby, but it's made up. Truth is, we the lost sheep of Jacob. Black and brown, yeah, it's time for y'all to wake up. Genocide, black on black, brown on brown hate. Eugenics looking for the devil, it's the white race. So keep your knee on our neck until you cause death. Tie that rope and let that noose take our last breath. Esau swore he'd kill his brother, so don't half step. Black and brown lives taken, don't get no respect. Breonna Taylor, Vanessa Guillen, I'm mine too. Andres Guardado and George Floyd, to name a few. She for slaughter, yet sometimes it don't seem fair. Ezekiel 37.
Breathe there. Breathe there. Breathe there. I know sometimes in life it don't seem fair. Your life here is a nightmare. But breathe the breath of life air.
Native lives, can't forget those. Divide and conquer, that's a cheat code. No legislation, it's a street code. Native, brown, and black, we the chosen people. We live in Babylon for Jerusalem. There was one reason you can never get through to them. Trust on that other side is forever green. And what's the dragon to a shepherd king? Anti-Semitic, but we Shemites. Don't be ashamed and don't apologize. Know who you are and let your people know. This prophecy exposing all lies. A royal priesthood, we are called gods. We are rich though in this world, we are have-nots. Disenfranchised and subjugated. Control my sorrow for your entertainment. There's an awakening amongst the famous. Don't let them redirect your conversations. I'm not a color, who the hell are you? These white folks lying, we the real Jews. By breathing life, you gotta keep commandments. This communion, get your bread, we caught up in the famine. Sheep for slaughter, we among the tares. We the valley of the dry bones.
Breathe there. Breathe there. Breathe there. I know sometimes in life it don't seem fair. Your life here is a nightmare. But breathe the breath of life air.
Finally had to realize I'm nothing but a servant. It ain't about me, it's about you. You was willing to lay your life on the line for us.
How y'all feeling? All praise to the Most High. So today we decided to do something a little different. Every week we got Bishop Tazayuan, who gives us a powerful, usually spiritual character lesson. But we decided to start bringing back, like we once used to do, some presentations. So today we have a special presentation for you guys. Let's take it to the PowerPoint, Yash. The name of today's presentation is Before They Were Latin, A Tale of Two Kingdoms. Go to the next slide. So before we actually get started, here are a few terms or a few words for you to look out for. Race, people of common descent. From the 1560s, people descended from a common ancestor, a class of persons allied by common ancestry. Nation, a large body of people united by common descent, history, culture, language, inhabiting a particular country or territory. Spanish, Spaniards, descendants of those who conquered the indigenous people of the New World. Latino or Hispanic, descendants of those indigenous persons conquered by Spaniard invaders. And Indians, those indigenous to the North, Central, and South America. Indians and Latinos, Hispanics will be used interchangeably in all sources, since those historians refer to the Aztecs, the Mayans, and those neighboring islands, etc., as Indians. Go to the next slide. So, in history, there are three major diasporas that are still a mystery to this day. The African diaspora. In West Africa, there still are, tribes there at the time before they were taken into slavery that were different from other African tribes. These were the ones that the other Africans sold into slavery and ended up over here. The Latinos, when you look at the indigenous Native Americans and the indigenous Latinos, take us back to the PowerPoint, you'll see that the history of them is also a mystery. How did they get to the Western Hemisphere when the Western Hemisphere was once uninhabited? Nobody was here, right? There's many theories that have come to how they got here. And then you have Israel. Now, when you do the research on Israel, after the siege of 70 AD, those that did not get killed and were enslaved, they fled. There's speculation as to where they actually fled, and a few centuries before that, you had the, the 10 tribes who got taken into the Assyrian captivity, and essentially, according to most scholars, they say they just disappeared. They fell off the face of the earth. So these are the three major diasporas in history, trying to figure out where these different Africans came from, trying to figure out how these indigenous Latinos and indigenous Native Americans got to the Americas, and where did those Israelites go that left Israel. So just like African Americans, natives of Latin America are also looking for their identity. Go by a bunch of different names. Greek wise. Read the definitions, Chicano. While Mexican American identity merged and encouraged assimilation with white America, While Mexican American identity emerged to encourage assimilation into white American society and separate the community from African American political struggles, Chicanos' identity emerged among the anti-assimilationist youth, some of whom belonged to the Pachuco subculture, who claimed the term, which had previously been classist and a racist slur. So Chicanos came up with that particular term because they didn't want to be known as Mexican Americans. Mexican Americans were those Mexicans or Hispanics that said, we're proud Americans, we want to assimilate into the white culture. Chicanos said, no, the hell we don't. We want to make sure that you understand that we're not with you guys, right? It says Chicano was widely reclaimed in the 60s and 70s to express political empowerment, ethnic solidarity, and pride of being indigenous, or excuse me, of indigenous descent, with many using the Nahuatl language as a symbol, diverging from the more assimilationist Mexican American identity. Take me to the next one. So we have Chicanos, we have Boricua, which is derived from the Taino word Boriquen. It's used to affirm Puerto Ricans' devotion to the island's Taino heritage. The word Boriquen translates to the great land of the valiant and noble lord. Boriquen was the original name used by the Taino population before the arrival of the Spanish. So the Tainos were, what is it called? They were inhabiting Jamaica, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and even Hispaniola, which is Haiti and the Dominican Republic. That's where the Tainos lived. And the people who did not want to be a part of the Spaniard culture or all of the conquered, they said, we're going to go by Boricua because we have pride in what we were before you guys got here. But again, it's just them searching out an identity. The Chicanos just searching out an identity. Because before that, yeah, some were called Tainos, some were called Aztecs, some were called Mayans. But even their culture runs further back than that. Take me to the next one. So then we have Hispanic versus Latino versus Latinx. And it says, as several people with Latin American roots, what term best describes us collectively? And you'll certainly receive a variety of answers. So just like so-called African Americans searching for their different names, from colored, Afro-American, African-American, Negro, and whatever other title we had, Latinos have the exact same problem, the exact same situation. They're still looking for their identity as well. Take me to the next slide. So the question is this: who were the indigenous Latinos? What was their culture? What was their ritual? What were their rites? What does the archaeology say about them? What does the historians say about these people? Next slide.
European exploration and the colonization of the Americas was mainly fueled by the necessity for resources and wealth. The Orient, also known as the East, with exotic products such as pottery, silk, and species, soon became a magnet to European traders. The trading route via the Silk Road, however, was under threat by the middle of the 15th century due to the rise in the power of the Ottoman Turks and the impairment of the Mongol Empire. At the same time, the development in shipbuilding and navigation made it possible for longer and further to travel. This helped to secure the trading route with Asia, and unexpectedly led to the exploration of a new land, which is later known as the Americas. European discovery of the Americas. In 1492, while on expeditions to find new trade routes from Europe to Asia, Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer, accidentally discovered a new world that possessed all the natural wealth which the Europeans sought so eagerly. This new world, or later known as the Americas, is the continents of the Western Hemisphere, including North America, which covers Central America and the Caribbean islands, and South America. Before the arrival of European explorers, the Americas were home to tens of millions of native peoples that are now known collectively as American Indians or Native Americans. With great deposits of gold and other minerals, as well as vast plains, valleys, and mountains, this new land was viewed by the Europeans as an enormous wilderness area with great economic potential, and thus became the land of dreams for those who were longing for resources and wealth. This period of exploration and discovery soon became an international race of major European powers, Spain, France, and England, to increase their wealth and establish colonies around the world. Spanish Empire in the Americas.
You can pause it there. So there was a few key points that we want to get out of here. One was that Christopher Columbus accidentally stumbled upon this land. We're going to go into the history. We're going to go into the information and show Christopher Columbus knew exactly where he was going. Then you saw that these people were already living rich. Then you had the Spanish, the French, you had the British that were all coming to this land saying, yo, there's a lot going on over here. There's a lot of riches. And the Spanish specifically, when we get into it, rather, they're going to speak on what they saw when they got to this land. What type of culture these people had when they got to this land. What type of clothes they were wearing, what their customs were, what they believed, what type of laws they were keeping. So it's important to keep all of this in mind as we continue on. Let's go, give me the next slide. Let's go back to the proclamation. So the indigenous people were titled as Mayans, Aztecs, Incas, Tainos, and etc. There's a few other names that they had in this time, but these were the main ones, and these were the biggest kingdoms at that time. Go ahead. So let's talk about the archaeology. What were the findings? What were the evidence that they found in this particular land? Next slide. So the Las Piedras stone collection of Nazario. This was a collection of a number of stones that was found in Puerto Rico. Read that.
The Nazario collection, also known as Aguebana's Library, Father Nazario's rocks, and the Phoenician rocks are a cache of carved stones that originated in Guayanilla, Puerto Rico. According to the contemporary accounts, the statuettes made of local serpentine rocks were first discovered by Catholic priest Jose Maria Nazario and Cancel during the 19th century and feature unidentified petroglyphs that have been speculated to be connected to the old world for over 130 years.
Right, so they were explaining that there was a number of stones found that had a bunch of carvings on it, and people have been trying to figure out where exactly, what are these inscriptions, right, Reed?
Nazario would combine his research with his religious background, leading to the hypothesis that there might be some connection between them and the 10 lost tribes.
Right, but continue on.
Turning to the engravings, while some experts claimed that the ancient writing system was similar to Sumerian, others felt that it was closer to the Phoenician.
Right, now if you understand what the Phoenician, when they're saying it's closer to the Phoenicians had the same writings, the same inscriptions as the Israelites. It was Hebrew. So they looked at the inscriptions on the, on the rocks, on the stones. They said, man, this looks very similar to the Hebrew writings that we see in the Near East or in the Eastern world, right, Reed?
And so spun a complex web of theories built on speculation, which have led many scientists to disregard the whole messy discovery as ridiculous. And so they leave it alone.
So now here's the thing. This has happened on a number of occasions when we would start going through historical documents, historical artifacts, archaeology, and someone says, you know what, this looks like it could be connected to the ancient Israelites. People automatically go to, oh, this man's a nut job. Oh, this man's a religious buff. Oh, this man is so... We're just going to throw it all away. They've done this a number of times. They did it in Egypt when they found proof that the Israelites were there, and they did it even here because they're like, we don't really want to touch that because the majority of people say, no, the Jews are still there right now. So they said because it spun a whole bunch of different theories, they said we're just going to throw it all away altogether. That's what we're going to do. We're just not going to touch it. So then a few centuries later, somebody came back to those stones and started researching it again. And this was in Puerto Rico, right? Read on.
However, it now seems all those hard-nosed skeptics were utterly and completely wrong.
And they came to the conclusion that, you know what? This might actually be Phoenician. These writings do look Hebrew. And so the people who were saying, no, that's impossible. No, there's no way. You're just a religious nut. As they continued to do the research, they were like, you know what? This is a little hard to argue with. This is a little difficult for us to refute. So here are a few of the stones and the inscriptions that are on them. Now, Hebrew had a few different variants as you look as time went on. The structure slightly changed. Let's go to the next slide. And then here are some other ones. And these are just the carvings and the inscriptions that are on those rocks. And so the researchers and the scientists that looked at these rocks said, yeah, this is some type of either Sumerian cuneiform, which is also in the Fertile Crescent, the Near East, or excuse me, the Middle East, or some type of Hebrew. One of the two. Next slide. So now we're going to get a video. This is actually a pretty old video by a man named Glenn Beck. He used to have his own segment on Fox News. He liked to talk about hidden or lost civilizations and other different historical.
Look at the angle.
Go ahead, play it.
Of the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you take the angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the slope is 51.8 degrees. Let's go back to the earthworks. If you measure the line that goes straight through the center of the structure, right here, and then you go true north, it's 51.8 degrees. That angle is exactly the same angle as the pyramids of Giza. It is the same math, the same calculations as ancient Egyptians. Let me show you one more connection. In 1860, David Wyrick, he's a guy who surveyed the Newark earthworks. He was digging into a mound near those earthworks, and he found a wooden coffin made of oak. They opened up the coffin and found a skeleton of a man holding a little box that was about 8.10 inches in size. The box had been cemented shut here. This, by the way, is sitting in Ohio. Well, he opened up the box and he found a little man inside, a little black stone. They took it to scholars and they looked at it. The man seems to be carrying something, and there's writing here. At first, they couldn't recognize. The writing is, they thought in 1860, some sort of Hebrew. Well, finally, about 20 years later, they found some rabbis living in the area, and the rabbis looked at that, and they could read it. They said it was an old kind of block Hebrew, and it was a rendition of the Ten Commandments. Now, this is another piece. Block Hebrew, they said they'd never seen anything like it. Mainstream archaeologists at the time called this a hoax. But then in 1900, or just about after 1900, in Israel, they found the same block-style Hebrew writing. Mainstream archaeologists still dismiss the findings. They found it in Israel, and they found it in Ohio. But there was another stone that they found that they couldn't argue. This is the Bat Creek stone. It was found during the course of an official Smithsonian evacuation. The Smithsonian didn't understand the meaning of the writing on the stone. They thought it was Cherokee, since it came from Cherokee country. They didn't realize that it's actually Hebrew. They had published this originally upside down. They threw it in a box at the bottom of the Smithsonian, put it in the basement. Many years later, a scholar took it out of the box, looked at it, and went, oh my gosh, it's upside down. It's Phoenician, ancient Hebrew. So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history? I'll show you in a few minutes, and we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to show you some more things that the Smithsonian, science, government, commerce colluded to erase. By the way, I want to thank the directors of the documentary Lost Civilizations of North America for bringing these stories to my attention. I was blown away. To find more, visit the website, lostcivilizationdvd.com. Here's the thing we should be asking ourselves. I don't know the story of these. Do you know that? Did you know that? Do you live in Ohio, and did you know that? Why not?
Right. Now, here's the thing. This was just talking about in North America. Now, the reason why this was brought out was, one, because of the whole information regarding the pyramids, right? The exact same structure, the exact same blueprint, the exact same calculations that you find as it pertains to the pyramids. You find it in Egypt. You find it in the Americas. Now, according to history, pyramids originated where? In Egypt, right? So the question is, how did the architects to these, the blueprint, the information, travel all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the Western Hemisphere? And not only did they find it in Ohio, they find it in Mexico, they find it in Central and South America, right? Take us to the next slide. So this is in Mexico, Teotihuacan, Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun. It's the biggest pyramid in Mexico. Right behind it is the Pyramid of the Moon. Next slide. And we have the Pyramid of El Castillo, which is in Chichen Itza, Mexico. Next one. The Temple of Quetzalcoatl, which is the feathered serpent, right? Take me to the last one. So this is the actual close-up engravings on these pyramids. Now, when you do the research, it says the exact same thing. The way that these were built, the angles that were used, it probably wasn't as high, as tall as the pyramids in Egypt, but the exact same calculations were used. And not only do we see the pyramids, not only do we find the collection of the Las Piedras de la Nazaro, or de Nazaro, his statuettes. You still have like the Las Lunas stone in New Mexico, which originally was a part of the Aztec Empire, originally a part of Mexico. And on the Las Lunas stone, it was Hebrew writing. So archaeology alone makes you question where these people came from, because a lot of this looks like Eastern Hemisphere, Near East, Middle East archaeology, right? But now watch this. Next one. Let's talk about cultural similarities. Let's talk about language parallels. Let's see what the historians, let's see what the people of that time noticed. The Myth of the Lost 10 Tribes by Haim Ghazali. This is an article written on the ANU Museum, or written in the website of the ANU Museum. This is a museum in Israel, right? Go ahead, read that.
In South America, the hypothesis connecting the American Indians to the 10 lost tribes of Israel was advanced mainly by Spanish missionaries and travelers while coming across impressive archaeological remains of the pre-Columbian civilization, or investigating the way of life of local tribes believed to recognize various customs and beliefs that they related to the Bible and Judaism.
Right, read.
Most reports refer to native tribes living in the region, in regions that today are part of Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Peru, but also in the countries of Central America, especially Mexico.
Right. So it says these tribes believe and recognize various costumes. So what they were wearing, their attire, they called them costumes because it wasn't something that was, normal to the eyes of the Spaniards when they saw these things and came over. And their beliefs. It says they related their beliefs to the Bible and Judaism. Now, mind you, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas, even the Native Americans, they didn't have a Bible. But they had, somehow, some way, been keeping the same cultures and customs that when these people came over, they were like, this looks real familiar to what we read here in the Torah. So how is that possible? How is this a thing, right? But let's continue on, and we'll see what other people were witnessing, other historians were witnessing. This is from Nova on PBS. So Nova is its own segment on PBS that likes to speak about history and science. And this is what they had to say. Read that.
In the early 16th century, Bartolomé de las Casas became the champion of the Native American Indians, devoting his lifetime to improving the conditions in the West Indies, Peru, and Guatemala.
Right, so again, they looked at anyone that was in America as an Indian, because it says the American Indians, but then it goes on to tell you where Bartolomé de las Casas was. He was in the West Indies, which were the islands. He was in Peru, and he was in Guatemala, right? What did he write? Read.
Las Casas wrote, "The Indians can bring near the redemption. If we treat them humanely in this world, and convert them to Christianity.
Right, read.
We are preparing for the redemption of the Western world in the Messianic era.
Right.
Their conversion is apt
Their
indeed,
conversion is more than sufficient. It's needed indeed, right, read.
as I am convinced the Indians originate in ancient Israel.
So he's looking at their customs. He's looking at their rituals. He's listening to their language. He sees the archaeology too, and he's like, I think that these people come from ancient Israel, right, read.
I can bring proofs from the Bible that they are of the lost tribes.
He said, now, if I open up this book right here, which back then they understood it to be historically accurate. We live in a place and a time now where people are questioning the authenticity of the Bible altogether. But in that time, even in the Middle East right now, they all know that historically speaking, the Bible is a factual historical book. But he understood that already, right? And he said, if you give me a chance, I'll pull out these records. I'll pull out this book. And I'll show you from what I'm seeing here, from what I'm hearing here, to the way they're living here, that these people are the exact same people as the ancient Israelites in the Bible. Read on.
The associations of the Indians with the lost tribes was heard again and again.
So it didn't stop with just him. It wasn't like he's the only one that noticed it, and it's like, oh, he's just a damn nut job. No, it said other people noticed this too. Read.
The report by the Portuguese traveler Antonio Montezinos, some 120 years later, aroused remarkable interest.
So over a century later, somebody else came to the conclusion, right? Read.
It was a thrilling journey I took in South America.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I am back in Amsterdam, I must share with you some incredible news. There is a Jewish Indian tribe living beyond the mountain passes of the Andes.
Read.
Indeed, I myself heard them recite the Shema, the expression of the Jewish faith, and saw them observe the Jewish rituals, lost tribes and promised lands.
Right. So this was just a summary of what he said that he saw. He said, just past the Andes, so this is in South America. He said, I saw these Indians. I heard them recite in Hebrew what's called the Jewish Credo. Shema Yasha Allah Yahweh, Allah Yahweh, Yahweh Echad. In modern Hebrew, is Shema Yisrael. Actually, we'll get it in a minute. Don't worry about it. We'll read it for you. But it basically says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. He said these Indians recited that. And I saw the things that I saw the rituals that they were doing. I saw the customs that they had. These are Jews. Now, mind you, this is 1500s. Actually, this is about 1600s at this time, because Bartolome de las Casas found out this information around 1520. So 120 years later, around 1640, the exact same thing was observed. And this was before the internet. This was before you could go on YouTube and type in who are the Israelites. They were reading the Bible. They were seeing people do things. They were like, damn, these rituals, these customs, this looks very familiar to the Torah. And mind you, if you go and you research, there used to be Jews in Spain. So these are all Spaniards that came over here when they were conquering, and there was a lot of Jews in Spain until they got exiled. So they had already seen people pretty much keeping these same customs. They get here, and they're like, these people don't look like them, but they're doing the same thing. They don't have Santa Biblia, but they're doing what's written in it. What is going on here? They're trying to figure this out, right? Next slide. This is from The Origin of the American Indian by Lee E. Huddleston. On page 71, it said what? Read that.
The Incas held the festival in March similar to the Passover.
Right, so now we're talking about the Incas, specifically right here. It says that they had a similar festival to what the Jews call the Passover, right? Read.
The Yucatecan Indians practiced circumcision.
Not everybody practiced circumcision, but this particular tribe, these particular people were practicing circumcision, because even today, people are like, oh my God, this mutilation. African culture, they didn't do things like that. I think the Muslims kind of started doing that because they were following what the Jews were doing. But originally, that wasn't a thing. Circumcision was not something the entire world was doing. But they're looking at like, these people are keeping the Passover just down the street. These people understand that, oh, you know, we're going to practice circumcision. Read on.
Mexicans and Incas had eternal altar fires.
Right, read.
Some Nicaraguans would not allow women who had recently given birth into the temples.
Because they were unclean, so they couldn't touch what was considered the holy things. Right, read.
Other parts of the law observed at various places included those which said that men should not sleep with women who had recently given birth.
Another law in the Torah. All of these things you can find in the Torah, right? Read.
Adulteresses were to be stoned.
Torah. Read.
Men and women must not wear each other clothes.
Torah.
And a widow must marry her nearest relative.
Again, these are all the same customs that these people in the Western Hemisphere were practicing. And these people who were seeing this was like, this sounds familiar. This looks familiar. Next slide. This is from the book of Lost Tribes and Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. And we're starting on page 364. It says, Montezino's story, unclear as to the circumstances of his incarceration, is equally unclear as to those of his release. But released he was, and he immediately went to Francisco, revealing himself as a Jew. Montezino proclaimed his conviction that Francisco's hidden people were of the same race as he. Would Francisco lead him to them? And two men were soon back in the rugged mountains in which Francisco had made his initial revelation, marching relentlessly for a week before they finally came to a halt. It was a Saturday. Montesinos made a point of telling us. And they had come to a river larger than the Duero. Are the echoes of the Sambation in all of this? Here Francisco announced, is where your brothers will be seen. Waving a banner high in the air, the Indian guide soon was greeted by a puff of smoke far beyond the bank of the river in response to his signal. The two men waited. Eventually, a canoe appeared, bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians, to the place where Francisco and Montesinos were standing at the water's edge. The woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue that Montesinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in this conversation. She then turned to her male companions and explained the situation. Upon hearing her words, they rose and went over to Montesinos, and to his utter astonishment, they said, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohenu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So these Native Americans, these indigenous Latinos in South America saw this man and said, he says he's one of us. Let's go over here and greet him. Let's see what happens. And it says when they greeted him with the Hebrew credo. It says they had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism. A brief conversation then ensued in their common ancestral tongue, Hebrew, according to Montesinos, whose fluency in it is almost as perplexing to the reader of his narrative as it is to the 3 mysterious new companions. They told him that they were themselves of the tribe of Reuben, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby. So, you have these Indians greet this other Indian. Clearly they had another language because Montesinos didn't understand the first language that the woman was talking. And she went back and spoke to the other Indian companions, which they had their own dialect or whatever. He didn't know what was going on. But she tells them, yeah, he says he's with you guys. He's one of you. They go over there. They hit him with the Shema Yisrael, right? And then they start talking in Hebrew. And then they told him, yeah, we're from the tribe of Reuben. Now, for those of you who don't know what the tribe of Reuben is, Reuben was a son of Jacob, whose name eventually turned to Israel, which makes them the progenitor of a particular tribe in Israel. So they're saying they're descendants from the nation of Israel. And then Tribe of Joseph, the exact same thing. Descendants of Israel. So they're saying, yeah, we're the Israelites. Yeah. Actually, not just us. We got some people right over here, just over the mountains. Next slide. Here's a book called Indians or Jews. Page 23 by Lynn Glaser. Go ahead, read that.
The belief that the Native Americans were the 10 lost tribes of Israel held the upper hand for centuries.
For a week.
For centuries.
For a year.
For centuries.
They said hundreds of years. They believed Native Americans were Israelites. This was not something that just kind of popped up in 1995, 2006. This was back in the 1500s. They said for centuries, hundreds of years. This was the prominent belief. It said this held the upper hand for a very long time because these Spaniards that read the Bible all the time, that saw Jews in Spain at the time, came over here to these random people and saw that they were doing the same thing. So for hundreds of years, they were like, yeah, we could see this. We believe that these people are the tribes of Israel, the lost tribes of Israel, right? Read.
In the face of the mystery of the Indians' origin.
Again, one of the mysteries, how did they get here? Where do they originate, right? Read.
It was necessary to find a biblical, or at least ancient, authority for their presence.
So they're like, we're gonna try to figure this out. And when they were trying to figure it out, this is the conclusion that they came to. These are historians. This isn't just some random young adult that's standing here on Florence and Normandy talking about this. This is people who traveled across the world. This is people that wrote books about this. This is people that other people studied as primary sources to get this information. This information was already accepted. This belief was already held in high esteem at that time, right? Read.
And through the 19th century,
so the 1800s,
most people knew enormous amount about the Bible and the people therein.
So most people were always reading the Bible. So when they're seeing these customs being followed, when they're seeing these people doing these things, they're like, I've read this somewhere. I think that's in the Bible. But they don't have a Bible. Because again, they don't speak English. They don't speak Spanish. They don't have a Santa Biblia. They don't have a King James authorized Bible. How the hell do they know this stuff? Read.
And virtually nothing about the other cultural schemes.
Right, read.
Consequently, they could easily find the parallels between the strange customs of the Hebrews and similar ones in America.
So they said they saw parallels. They saw that there were some very strong similarities here, right? Read.
All the early Spanish historians.
One of the early Spanish historians.
All the early Spanish historians.
Some of them.
All of them.
Nah, most of them.
All the early Spanish.
Every single Spanish historian. Read.
Notice the similarities between the customs of the Indians and the Jews.
I mean, we could just go home right now because the information it's kind of in your face. They all knew. Everyone knew. So, you got these loud niggas on the corner that's always yelling about something and telling these people this stuff that they don't believe. This was nothing new. Like, these people knew this for hundreds of years. This wasn't something that they just popped up. Or one random dude knew about. Oh, no, that man's a religious nut job. No, all of these people believe this. They said we look at their culture. We're listening to their language. We see their writings. We look at their archaeology, their beliefs. There's no way that they're not these people. There's no way. But we have more. Next slide. So now, take us to the PowerPoint, Yash. So, was there Hebrew language in ancient America? This is an article that was found on Brigham Young's University, and is by John L. Sorensen. Next slide. This is the overview, the abstract of it. It says, in an interview with John L. Sorensen, linguist Brian Stubbs discusses the evidence he has used to establish that at least one language family in Mesoamerica, which is the Western Hemisphere before the Spaniards came and conquered, is related to the Semitic language, which is Hebrew. Stubbs explains how his study of the Near Eastern language, coupled with his studies of the Uto-Aztecan, helped him to find related word pairs in the two language families. The evidence for a link between the Uto-Aztecan and Semitic languages, or even the Egyptian and Arabic, is still tentative, although the evidence includes all the standard requirements of comparative or historical linguistic research. Sound correspondence or consistent sound shifts, morphological correspondence, and a substantial lexicon consisting of as many as 1,000 words that exemplify those correspondences. So what he's saying here is that even though we got all of these words that you can find in Hebrew and the Aztecs language, clearly they're pretty much the same word, it's just a slightly different dialect. And even though it follows all of the requirements or fulfills all of the requirements of this research, we're not going to say it's definitive. It might still change. It's just tentative, right? But watch this. Next slide. It says migration across an ocean poses bigger problem, of course, but science offers stunning surprises in every field. If the data provided solid results, we pursue them further. Bad ideas hit dead ends. There's a point that he's making here. So it says, if we're doing our research and this information provides solid results, like, man, we can continue on looking into this because this answers this question, we're good. It says, but if it's a bad idea or if it's horrible scholarship, we run into a dead end, we have to throw it away. It says, yet, this Uto-Aztecan Near East case is becoming more convincing with each year of investigation. So the more that we research, the more that we look, the more proof that we find that these people had a very similar language. The more we look, the more language parallels that we see between the two. So archaeology, the historians spoke about the cultures. We're looking at the language now. Next slide. Same article. The meanings are clearly the same or near to it, while the sounds are recognizably similar and appear in the same order. So going back to what they were expressing earlier, the way that they spoke, the influxes, all of that is the same in Hebrew and in this Aztecan language. So these words were the same. It says, however, the real strength in this case is not in a handful of words, but in the fact that perhaps 1,000 comparable similarities have been identified. So it's not just these few words. It said we found them in a number of different words as we're continuing to compare the two ancient languages. But in the fact that we perhaps found 1,000 comparable similarities that have been identified in accordance with phonological rules, not easily explained in a short article for general audiences. The lexical evidence is fairly extensive, but they say it's not enough. Not enough to suggest that the Hebrew is the sole ancestor of the Uto-Aztecan language. The Near Eastern element in the Uto-Aztecan lexicon may constitute 30 to 40%. So they say out of all of these words, about half of it is Hebrew. So we can't say that Hebrew is the sole language that these people spoke or the sole ancestral language of the Uto-Aztecan language, but we see about half of it is accurate. But again, the archaeology, we see culture, we see ritualistic beliefs, and we see language, right? Next slide. Now here's the question. The historians believed it for centuries. These people were the children of Israel. You had Indians that were in Central and South America that said it themselves. Yeah, we're of this tribe. These people are of that tribe, and they're just right around the corner from us. You see the engravings on different stones. You see the pyramids. You see all of this evidence that traces them back to some type of Hebrew roots. Now the question is, if this be true, how did they get here? Let's see. Second Ezra, chapter 13 and verse 40. Read that.
Mic check. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanasar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so they came into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a farther country, where never mankind dwelt,
Right.
that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they enter into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood, till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half.
So there's a number of things I want you to remember here. It says they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth to a further country where never mankind dwelt. So they're going to go to a place where it was uninhabited, virtually uninhabited. It says so they can keep their statutes there. And it says they entered into the Euphrates. Pretty much they got on ships. They rowed their ships to this place. The Lord held still the tumultuous floods for them. So it was a smooth sail wherever they went. And it said it took them a year and a half to get there. And this place was called Arsareth. Keep all of these things in mind. It took a year and a half. They had to go over there by ships. And it was a place that no one had inhabited yet, virtually uninhabited. Next slide. So this is from the Jewish Encyclopedia, the definition of Arsareth. This is the definition, the name of the land beyond the great river. They didn't call things oceans back then. It was big bodies of water, the sea or the river or the great river, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of restoration. Columbus, Christopher Columbus, as we'll see, identified America as this land, according to Kayserling's Christopher Columbus, translated by Dr. C. Gross. Next slide. The name, it has been suggested by Schiller Sinesi, is taken from Deuteronomy 29. Verse 24 through 27. Because they forsook the covenant of the Lord and went and served other gods, the Lord rooted them out of their land, cast them into another land. That word, another land, is Eretz Aheret, as this day. So they say that the word Arsareth just means another land. It's the English version of that Hebrew word, Eretz Aheret, or Arsareth, right? Now this is, go ahead, next slide. This is from a book called The Aztecs by Diego Duran. And it says, they always profess, it's talking about the Aztecs, they always profess to have come from strange lands. Now I have found this depicted in their ancient painted manuscripts, where they portray the great periods of hunger, thirst, and nakedness with innumerable afflictions that they suffered until they reached this country and settled in it. Because of these things, my suspicions are confirmed that these natives are part of the 10 tribes of Israel, which Shalmaneser, king of the Assyrians, captured and took to Assyria in the time of Hosea, king of Israel, and in the time of Hezekiah, king of Jerusalem, as can be read in the book of the Kings, chapter 18, where one finds that Israel was carried out of its own land into Assyria. It also says that this remote, distant country had never been inhabited before. There was a long, tedious journey of a year and a half to the region where today are found these people of the islands and the mainland toward the west beyond the seas. So how do we get this whole year and a half thing? Clearly, it's the Western Hemisphere. About to see. Next slide. Read that for me.
So Yucatan before and after the conquest. Translated with notes by William Gates, New York, Dover Publications, 1978. Some old men of Yucatan say that they have heard from their ancestors that this country was people by a certain race who came from the east, whom God delivered by opening from them 12 roads.
So these are ancient Mesoamericans, Central and South Americans that are telling people this stuff. This was Again, this ain't just something that just popped up last year, a decade ago, even 100 years ago. This is something that they've been talking about for hundreds of years. Even the ancient Yucatan, they're telling them this place, these people that got here originally came from this place. This is who we descend from, right, Reed?
If this is true, all the inhabitants of the Indies must be of Jewish descent. Because the Straits of Magellan having been passed, they must have spread over more than 2,000 leagues of territory now governed by Spain.
Right. Now watch this. Let's go to this next clip. This is from a movie. Go ahead and play it. This is from a movie called 1492, Conquest to Paradise. This is a clip with Christopher Columbus and how he found the New World.
Why did you wish to sail west? To open a new route to Asia. Asia is the richest kingdom, the land of spices and gold. At the moment, there are only two ways of reaching it. By sea, sailing around the African continent. The journey takes a year. Or by land. But the Turks have closed this route to all Christians. There is a third way. By sailing west across the ocean sea.
The distance is unknown. It's said to be infinite.
Superstition. I believe the Indies are no more than 750 leagues west of the Canary Islands.
How can you be so certain?
The calculations of Toscanelli, Marin de Tir, Esdras.
Esdras is a Jew.
So what's worse?
2 minutes, and already you're a dead man.
For telling the truth?
Yes. We are burning people for less.
Burying people for less. So, this is this is what's crazy, right? So you heard what he said. He said, why do you want to sail to Asia? Or why do you want to sail west? He's trying to allegedly get to Asia. Knowing these people, they're notorious for lying. Because we're going to see that he already knew where he was going. So there's a few things that we want to touch before we get to that point. So he said he's going to sail west, approximately 750 leagues, and we're going to run into Asia, right? So, Ferdinand Magellan, on September 20th, I want you guys to keep this in your mind. Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, with 5 ships and a crew of 270 men, set sail for Sanlúcar del Barrameda in southern Spain on what would become the first circumnavigation of the world. This would be the first ever recorded time that somebody circled the entire world by ship, right? Magellan himself died during the tumultuous 3-year voyage. So it took 3 years to go all the way around the earth, with Spaniard Juan Sebastian Elcano completing the journey from the Philippines back to Spain with a final crew of only 18 men. Despite Magellan's tragic end, his legacy has become synonymous with the exploration and geography, including the Strait of South America. That still bears his name. Next slide. So this is the map of his circumnavigation. So they started up there in Spain. They went down and caught the currents around South America, continued west, ended up over here near Australia and the Philippines, took the currents down under the Indian Ocean, and back up to Spain. That took 3 years. Next slide. This is why this is important. If we look around here, this is where you see the laser, where Israel was taken captive. This was known as Assyria. We left Assyria, entered into the Euphrates right there, went into the Persian Gulf, came out of the Persian Gulf, and took these currents south around East Africa, down to South Africa, caught the currents up toward West Africa, and ultimately into South and Central America. Well, how do we know this? Because if we would have went east, nowhere over there is going to take a year and a half to get to by sea. If you decide you're going to walk across it, maybe. And you can clearly see from Arabia or the Indian Ocean or the Persian Gulf to the Western Hemisphere is approximately halfway across the world. So Magellan took 3 years to get all the way around. 3 divided by 2, 1.5. 1.5 years to get halfway across the world, right? In addition to that, it said that they would go to a place where never mankind dwelt. All historians agree that America was uninhabited before these Indians popped up here. The question was just always, where did these Indians come from? Who were these people? That was the problem. But prior to that, they knew that this was uninhabited land. People came over here, some people came over here because they had knowledge of it, and they would take from this land. It was a land full of gold. It was a land full of spices. They had exotic animals. That's all they knew. But nobody lived here. So Israel said, we're going to go to a place where never mankind dwelt. That was about a 1.5 years journey away, so we can start keeping our laws. Then, ironically enough, Spaniards come over here and say, these Aztecs, these Mayans, these Incas, it looks like they're following the stuff that's in our Bible. It looks like they're doing the same customs as we see right here written in this book. So, next slide. This is just another map so you can see, again, the currents and the way that they got here into the West Atlantic Ocean, or the West Atlantic. Now, Las Casas, the chronicler who sailed with Columbus, wrote that they navigated 700 leagues day and night because the admiral was not expected to sight, had not expected to sight land sooner than 750 leagues west of the Canary Islands. The last 50 leagues were sailed only during the day. Las Casas informs us, noteworthy is the fact that the distance of 750 leagues is almost exactly the distance from the western islands of the Canary Archipelago, where the flotilla began its voyage, to the eastern islands of the Caribbean Sea. Las Casas also says that in Madeira, Columbus learned from the crew of a Portuguese ship that they were returning from a land further west. So people had already been going there. Columbus already knew this. So when he was talking to the friar, he was doing what they always do. He was lying. It says, moreover, Fernando Columbus, his son, states in his father's biography that Columbus had previous information of the existence of land in the West Atlantic, which were the West Indies, which was Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the mainland, which was Mexico, and South America, right? It says Columbus had previous information of the existence of West Atlantic and even possessed a map with charted islands in the sea, or the Caribbean. Columbus learned celestial navigation from the Portuguese pilots. He was also taught to sail the great circles of navigation from 1480 to 1490 when returning from Africa, the Arc of Mina, Arc of Azores, and the Arc of Sargasso Sea. Before Columbus was born, the Portuguese sailors were already familiar with the water currents and the winds, which later brought him to the West Indies. So people were here before him. Like I said, people would come back and forth from here all the time because they had gold, they had exotic animals, they had a bunch of different agriculture that they would come and pick up and go back home. But nobody was living here yet. We have already stated once the Portuguese navigators were locked in the Canary Current and the North Equatorial Drift, that once they were practically forced to terminate their voyage at the West Indies or in South America. This is a conclusion that can be verified today with modern scientific methods of navigation. So, all that to say, you can follow the currents that will drop you off right here, and again, it will take you approximately a 1.5 years to this land that nobody was living in. Next slide. So in conclusion, when examining the archaeology, the architecture, the history, and what the historians said, linguistics, the anthropology or their cultures, their rituals, the things that these people were practicing, and as we'll continue to see, as we continue in the presentation, the curses, the prophecies, It can be concluded that the Latinos, the Hispanics, the descendants of the Mayans, Aztecs, Incas, Taínos, etc., are the descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel and ultimately the descendants of the Israelites in the Bible. Next slide. So here's the thing. Not only the Latinos, but who else? The Jews are the African American, indigenous Latinos, and Native American. The indigenous Latinos are a part of the 10 tribes of Israel. And in future presentations, we'll deal with the indigenous Native Americans and the so-called African Americans. Next slide. And this is where we get the term a tale of two kingdoms, because the northern kingdom consists of indigenous Native Americans and indigenous Latinos. We've dealt with half of that, and we'll deal with the other half coming very soon. And then the southern kingdom, which is the other kingdom, the African Americans, we'll deal with that in a future presentation as well. So, here's the thing. There's a number of different nations. They look slightly different because they have different tribes within their nation, but they're still the same nation of people. You got that with Caucasians. Even when you look at African people, bunch of different tribes, exact same nation or race of people. You have the same thing with the Arabs, and same thing with black and brown people. Different tribes of the exact same nation, of the exact same race. May look a little different over here, may look a little different over there, but exact same as it pertains to bloodline, the exact same as it pertains to the DNA. Next slide. Here's a question. If all of these people are Israel, because we've already proven the indigenous Latinos, we're going to show you the indigenous natives and, of course, the African Americans in future presentations. But they all look so different. So if we are all the same, why do we look so different? And here to explain that is our brother Kabash.
Shalom, everybody. How y'all feeling? All right, so I'm gonna just go into a couple of slides breaking down DNA genetics and also pretty much explain how, our different complexion, how the complexion changed within the nation of Israel. But nevertheless, breaking down that all of us could look differently, but we are still connected to the same source. So, in the beginning, the Most High created nations, and He made nations different. This is something that we recognize as race. So in order to really understand this concept, we really need to understand the difference between DNA and genetics. Let's get that slide. You can read both of those definitions.
The difference between gene and DNA. Gene. A gene is a sequence of DNA or RNA that codes for a molecule that has a function. The transmission of genes to an organism's offspring is the basis of the inheritance of phenotypic traits. DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid is a molecule composed of two chains which coil around each other to form a double helix, carrying the genetic instructions used in the growth, development, functioning of all known living organisms.
So I know science could be very difficult to understand a lot of times, so I'm gonna try my best to make this simple for everybody to understand. So I'm just gonna, give y'all key points to just keep in mind when it comes to dealing with genes and when it comes to dealing with DNA. As it says right there, it says genes is a sequence of DNA. A sequence is just a portion. So within our genes, we only carry a portion of our DNA, and it's passed on from a parent unto its offspring. However, within the DNA has all possible combinations of genes. So we have a lot of genes within our DNA, but a lot of them are just simply stored as information. Because, after the flood, everybody here that is alive today comes from who? Noah. So, of course, a lot of our DNA is going to be very similar because, we come from a common ancestor. But then also, too, Most High said He made us out of dirt. What else come out of dirt? Plants, insects, animals. So sometimes you're gonna find situations where we share common DNA with them type of things too, because we are from the dirt as well. But like I said, DNA simply holds all of this information and it stores it and it keeps it within that, you know, within the DNA. However, genes will vary. Let's go to the next slide. So there are a couple of things I want you guys to keep in mind. First one is that genes only carry a portion. I'm gonna repeat that over and over again. Genes only carry a portion of DNA. However, DNA holds all possible combination of genes. So they're not the same. One is greater than the other. We also are made up of chromosomes, which are full of genes, and they control how our body develops and how our body will function as we continue to grow. But you know, as you said, thousands of genes are stored within our DNA. That doesn't mean that we're using all of them, but they're always going to remain within that DNA. So think about it like this. Your DNA could be a blueprint of how our body is created. Like it identifies what is being made. Our genes are the different components that create us physically, how we look, our body shape, our gender and stuff like that. You know, our hair texture, you know, everything in those types of senses. Then our chromosomes are the instructions that formulate how our body is going to grow and develop as we continue to age. Let's go to the next slide. So when you study biology, you'll learn that we get two sets of genes. One set comes from our mother, and one set comes from our father. And these are called our chromosomes. So men are XY chromosome, and women are XX. You can read that first. That's insert on the left.
DNA and genetics. The children inherit even smaller portions of their ancestors' autosomal DNA than their parents inherited. In fact, in every generation, the child inherits half of the DNA of each parent. That means that the other half of the parent's autosomal DNA is not inherited by the child. So in each generation, you lose half of the autosomal DNA from the previous generation, meaning half of your ancestors' DNA.
So remember, you're only getting half. One comes from one parent, the one comes from the other parent. And it said if you're only getting half, that means you're losing half as well. Read the next one.
Each child inherits half of their parent's DNA, but not the same half. So different children from the same parent will carry a different part of their parent's autosomal DNA.
So it says it could come from the same source. You got the same parents, but it says siblings could still have different parts of this genetic pool. So it's just to let you know that it don't matter, like the same source of DNA could be there, but at the end of the day, no matter where it's coming from, it could vary from person to person as far as the offspring. So nevertheless, as we continue to, when you look into genealogy, and because sometimes DNA can get very complicated, you have half of this one, and then you have half of that one, and they have half of another person. It's just going to trickle down to a whole bunch of different fractions and decimals as far as how much you are of this and how much you are of that. But nevertheless, just to keep it in your mind, these are just the different combinations of genes that are going to go through your body, but all of this information is going to stay within your DNA. Let's go to the next slide. So, my bad. So in the process of, childbirth and everything, each parent is going to pass on a chromosome. Women have XX chromosome, so a woman only going to give off an X chromosome to the offspring, whereas men have an XY chromosome, so the man could give off an X chromosome or he could give off a Y chromosome. Ultimately, depending on what chromosome that man gives, is going to determine the gender of the child, as well as how that child is going to develop and grow. You can read that first highlighted part.
Each son receives DNA for his Y chromosome from his father. This DNA is not mixed with that of the mother, and it is identical to that of the father unless a mutation occurs.
So first and foremost, I want you guys to keep in mind that the Y chromosome, there is something special about this Y chromosome. Read that one more again.
Each son receives DNA for his Y chromosome from his father.
So the Y chromosome comes directly from the father. Go ahead.
This DNA is not mixed with that of the mother.
The mother ain't got nothing to do with it, only the daddy. Go ahead.
And it is identical to that of the father.
Identical. What is identical? An exact replica. of that from the father. Go ahead.
Unless a mutation occurs.
Unless a mutation occurs. So the mutation does happen, and that is something that can happen. But then also when you read the scripture, kind of like when the Most High made it to different nations, he said these different people are going to have different mannerisms, different ways of living, different ways of thinking, different mindsets and stuff like that, different features. But it's because this is a mutation, and once a mutation happens, and that person have a baby, it's going to carry them that same mutation and from their lineage that point forward. So it is common, and this explains how we could all come from the same source, aka Noah, yet so many different kinds of people have come from them. Read that next part. Oh, my bad.
With the Y chromosome, is that why we can say the child is what the father is?
Yeah, I'm gonna get into it. I got it. Yeah. Get the next part. Yeah, good.
Y chromosomal DNA, Y DNA for short, is passed on from father to son. It represents a nearly unbroken chain that moves through all recorded history into the cloudy prehistory of our Neolithic and Paleolithic ancestors.
It says nearly unbroken chain. Like it's as if it's almost impossible for anything else could happen. So it's identical. For the father's gonna give that the same exact Y chromosome to his son, and that son is gonna give it to his son, and that son is gonna give it to his son, for so on and so on. Get that last highlight.
Barring mutation, two brothers could carry the same Y DNA as would two first cousins who were the sons of the brothers, or a nephew and his paternal uncle. In most Western cultures, these men would all have the same surname. The Y DNA thus becomes a genetic label for the surname. Comparison with other men with the same surname could confirm whether they had a common ancestor.
So right there, that answers your question right there, Raya. It says that if a man had two sons, right, and his sons have two sons, all of these men are going to have the same exact Y chromosome. So that's just your direct lineage into your ancestry, or however you want to put it, but it's just telling you that Y chromosome is never going to change no matter how much your genes change, no matter how different your siblings may look, no matter who you have your kids with from different people. Like, that Y chromosome is going to remain within that lineage of men. And if you look on this picture to the right, we have the different chromosomes, but then you see at the great-grandfather, that is a Y chromosome that is there, and it's passed down to the grandfather, and it's passed down to the father, and the same one is passed down to the son. However, all of the genes from those chromosomes are mixed up. You can't really see it on this image. I'm pretty sure y'all can see it on that. The different colors that are within those, that is within the son and the daughter, it's all mixed up, just from, like we said, you get half and half from your parents, one from your mother and one from your father. But nevertheless, that Y chromosome is going to remain the same. So it's the same concept when you look at, plants, fruits, and vegetables. You have an apple seed, you plant an apple seed, what are you going to get? Same thing with humans. We're always dealing with race of people. You have an Israelite seed or a black seed or a Latino seed, and you plant a Latino seed, what you're going to get? A Latino baby, an Israelite, same thing. So it's the same concept. It never changed. Like, that Y chromosome is always going to be the determining factor to identify what race or where this species or person belongs with. So in conclusion with it, like we said, your genes could change and it could alter from person to person. It could be different from sibling to sibling. You look at your family, everybody looks different. They probably have some similarities, but they look a little different. You could clearly identify differences between who is who, but nevertheless, everybody is still sharing that same DNA. So you won't always be able to just directly tell who's related by looking at them, but you will be able to tell who are related when you look into their DNA. Next slide. So why do Latinos look different from black. We sitting here, we telling everybody that Latinos and black are of the same nation, yet we all have different features. In reality, when you look at us, Latinos and black people have a big range of characteristics, from light skin to dark skin to black, to curly hair to straight hair, to short people to tall people, to small bodies to big bodies. There's so many different types of characteristics that we can produce when it comes to our people. But nevertheless, when you look at us, you are going to be able to find some similarities, but then sometimes too, you're going to see major differences as well. So, we're going to get into how did this happen. And the simplest way I could break this down to you is simply is that, the scripture talks about how our people intermingle with the other nations. So let's go to the next slide. So very first, one common law within Israel is that we were supposed to stay within our nation. Now, we had a couple of men that did have concubines and stuff like that. Something took that out of hand and they just went, they went to work. So, and they started having babies, but it destroyed a generation of Israel because we start to develop a lot of their genes, we start to develop a lot of their customs, and that took us further and further away from the Most High. But nevertheless, in the beginning, Israel always remained within Israel. So the difference in complexion and look began after we had split. The northern kingdom had went into Assyrian captivity while the southern kingdom went into Babylonian captivity. We could get this account in 2 Kings. You could read that.
2 Kings 17, verses 5 through 6. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hosea, for he had sent messengers to the king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Assyria and besieged it 3 years.
So to connect this to what was read earlier in 2nd Ezra, remember that right before our people have migrated to this land, it says that the 10 tribes were in the land of Assyria because they was taken as captive in the land of Nineveh. So that's only talking about a portion of the 12 tribes of Israel. It's not talking about the southern kingdom. So us being there, mingling with that people, whereas the southern kingdom is mingling with different people, it's clear that we're going to end up looking totally different from each other because we're in different land places, we're dealing with different people, and our children and our gene pool are just going to be completely different just based upon our location and the people that we're dealing with. Let's go to the next slide. So that was the beginning of intermingling with the other nations. Now, throughout history, you'll see, and it's very common that a lot of different countries have migrated, and they migrated for different reasons, leaving their homeland. It could have been for seeking different opportunity, like a lot of the white people, the Europeans did that, the Italians, the Spain, the Portuguese. If they saw a new opportunity, they was on it, they was on a hunt, and they was gonna start a new living in a whole different land. As we have saw it in that video earlier today, when they came to the Western Hemisphere, it was already people here, but what did they do? Forced their way in. It's like, yeah, I'm about to make a home here. And by doing that, of course, our curses and stuff like that, they did do a lot of raping, but a lot of them too have dwelt and start intermingling within the people that were there as well, just creating a new society of people. But even today, you'll see a lot of homes and communities of other nations all throughout Latin America. For example, in Mexico, there was a big Chinese migration that happened there, and that can explain why some Latinos have Chinese feature. Another example, the Lebanese and the Palestinians did a lot of migration, fleeing from persecution and hardship in their homeland, going all throughout Central America and El Salvador. And it'll explain why a lot of 10 tribe also look very similar to a lot of the East Indians or the Arab people. And of course, we got old faithful Esau that did his work on our people, and that also messed with our genes as well. But I just want you guys to keep in mind that a lot of these countries on the right side, you will see that they have migrated to Latin America and made a living in their land. So think about it. If you went to a different country and you had children, your children are more than likely going to have children with the people that are already there. That's going to be a little different from the people that you have come from. So from that point on, it only takes like 2 generations for genes to really take an effect and make you look completely different. But nevertheless, this is also ways that mingling has happened within the Latin American countries. Next slide. Another thing that our people have went through, let's go to Psalms 83. Esau had a very evil mission to do, pretty much to try to wipe us out as a nation. We're going to get that in scripture, and I'm going to break down this caste system, exactly how they tried to go forth with this. Psalms 83.
Psalm chapter 83, verse 4. They have said, "Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance."
Right there. It says that the name of Israel will be no more in remembrance. That was their whole goal. That was their whole purpose. That was something that they for sure, they was eager, they was strongly, and they was passionate that they wanted to make happen. We got to get rid of this whole nation of people. Go ahead.
For they have consulted together with one consent.
It wasn't them by themselves. It was all these other nations working with them as well. But like I said, the whole purpose was to wipe out this nation.
For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines, and the inhabitants of Tyre. Assur also joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah.
Yeah. Pretty much all of the different nations was, in cahoots with it, trying to make Esau help them accomplish this goal of wiping out the race of Israel. You can also get that in one of the curses in Deuteronomy 28. But go back to the last slide. But nevertheless, back to this system that they had implemented by the Spaniards called the caste system. The whole purpose of the caste system, when you do your research, was that they simply wanted to wipe out all black genes and make everybody predominantly white. They wanted a white society, but it was too many black people and too many indigenous people. They couldn't kill us all. So they was like, all right, let us try a different method into making this happen. So the way that they did that was they created kind of like a hierarchy based upon how you look, I guess you could say. Something we could recognize today as something like white privilege. The whiter you look, the more things you had accessibility to, the more privileges you had, the more acceptance that you had. And then the darker you were, the more disgrace, the more persecution, the more just people just doing you dirty and stuff like that. So that was something that was very common within the Spaniards when they came and conquered us within the Latin American countries. So pretty much the whole goal was, as time goes by, we want to make sure we want our society to be fully white and, no speculation, no speckles of black people or indigenous people at all. Next slide. And Blackamiento also, pretty much is the same concept as far as their mission or, their approach as far as making this happen. You can read that.
Blanqueamiento, or whitening, is a social, political, and economic practice used in many post-colonial countries in the Americas and Oceania to improve the race. Mejorar la raza.
Right there, you already see how they be twisting stuff up. They wanted to improve the race as if we was the one that was doing the damage. Nah. So, but when you look at Esau, they think they slick and all this other stuff, and they try to make their policies and their, give ultimatums and stuff like that, or try to give positive reasoning of the things that they do. But, it just shows you the wickedness that they have in their heart, honestly. But continue on.
To improve the race, mejorar la raza, towards a supposed ideal of whiteness. The term blanqueamiento is rooted in Latin America and is used more or less synonymously with racial whitening. However, blanqueamiento can be considered in both a symbolic and biological sense. Symbolically, blanqueamiento represents an ideology that emerged from legacies of European colonialism, described by Aníbal Quijano's theory of coloniality of power, which caters to white dominance in social hierarchies. Biologically, blanqueamiento is the process of whitening by marrying a lighter skinned individual to produce lighter skinned offspring.
That last sentence right there is part of the reason why the complexion of Latinos have changed in comparison to, the African American or the Southern Kingdom of Israel, because of how they intermingled their genes into our people, some by force, some by choice. But nevertheless, the whole purpose was to let's push our gene and get their genes out of here. Next slide. So that's explained a lot of the reason why certain 10 tribes have different features, like, straighter hair, lighter complexions, and things like that. But as we already broke down within the DNA, you are what your father is, and that's never going to change. So, all praise to the Most High for that. But nevertheless, keep in mind that people can look different, but that DNA is going to remain the same. So another thing I want to bring out to you guys is something that's common within our people are the use of last name. In many different cultures, it is very common that people will take on the last name of their father. Throughout history, our people have migrated, our people have fled persecution, our people have been taken into captivity. Our people have been through a lot of stuff. But nevertheless, many people have constantly changed their last names for various different reasons. Some of them was by force, some of them was for protection, and unfortunately, a lot of us, when we got into captivity, we were stripped from our history and our knowledge of our ancestors, and our identity as well. So therefore, a lot of times, last names were either created or they were just given to people. And oftentimes, last names could be, when you look at different last name, the creation of different last name, it could have been because of a description. It could have been because of your occupation. It could have been because of where you reside. It could have been because of your slave master. It could have been a whole bunch of different reasons why you got the last name that you got. However, we're going to go into a couple of these Spanish last names. Let's go to the next slide. Moreno. Moreno is very common last name amongst the 10 tribe community, Latino community. Like, I'm pretty sure everybody in here met a Moreno. But like I said, some names were given based off a description. So we're going to give you where this name comes from. Moreno name meaning Spanish, Portuguese, and Jewish, Sephardic, nickname for someone of dark hair and swarthy complexion. Swarthy means dark. So Moreno was something like I said, it's a description. A lot of times when you talk to people in different Latin countries, you would describe a dark-skinned Latino as a Moreno or Morena, just because of how they look. But nevertheless, as in that first line, it says it has Spanish origins, Portuguese origins, and Jewish origins, and specifically the Sephardic, in which we'll get into in a minute. But nevertheless, I want you guys to understand that Moreno does come from colored people. Go ahead. Spanish last names have Iberian origins. So these are just a couple of them. There's a lot more, but when you see many of the names that end with the suffix EZ, such as Vasquez, Enriquez, Gomez, Gonzalez, Chavez, Juarez, Mendez, Nunez, all that, they all, most of them, not all of them, most of them have an origin from the Iberian Peninsula. But what does that mean? Let's go to the next slide. What is the Sephardic Jews and what are the Iberians? They pretty much are the same one. Iberia is a location in Spain, and the Sephardic Jews are the Jews that were dwelling there. Can you read that first sentence?
The academic term is that Sephardim are the Jews from Iberia.
That's simple. Sephardic are the Jews from Iberia. Next slide. Can you read that for me?
When did the Jews first arrive in Spain? There are hints from the Bible that the lands of the Western Mediterranean were well known to the Israelites. Around 970 BCE, Solomon formed an alliance with Hiram of Tyre, the king of the Phoenicians.
Hold up right there. So we already broke down to you earlier that Solomon and Israel already had knowledge of this land before people was already over here. Solomon was sending Israel, as well as some of the Phoenicians and some parts of Africa. He made business and made alliance with different nations. But he been sending them over here from way back then. Go ahead, continue on.
Around 970 BCE, Solomon formed an alliance with Hiram of King Tyre, the king of the Phoenicians, providing Hiram with sailors who had a knowledge of the sea equivalent to that of the Phoenician sailors. The territories of the Israelite tribes of Asher, Zebulun, and Dan were part of Phoenicia.
So look, we talking about way before there was even a split within Israel. Solomon's been sending certain tribes to this side of the world. And since then, our people have been dwelling here, making it, inhabiting, living in the areas, staying there, surviving there, making their communities and stuff like that. Go ahead.
The territories of the Israelite tribes of Asher, Zebulun, and Dan were part of Phoenicia, and some early Spanish Jewish documents actually refer to those tribes as having descendants living in Iberia. The Bible implies that expeditions to Spain were routine as early as 10th century BC.
So this was a common thing that was happening way back then. Constantly sending people over there. The people that was already there constantly, you got families. You meet somebody, you're going to create generations and generations of people, and that population is going to continue to grow. But nevertheless, it's just to let you know that there's been people staying in the Iberian Peninsula ever since Solomon been sending them on that voyage. So to fast forward in time, there was a time where the Spaniards did a lot of persecution of the Jews. So a lot of the 10 tribes had to flee because a lot of our forefathers and foremothers were actually getting killed for being Jews. So, if you got caught with fringes, if you got caught keeping certain feast days, if you got caught keeping anything in connections to the laws of the Bible, that was like a direct, it made you a direct target. And of course, they're trying to get rid of us. So what did our people do? We fled. And then also, too, our people have also tried to cover up their identity so that they would, for their protection, because a lot of people, you don't want to die. So it's like, but then at the same time, we didn't want to also go against the Most High, because we knew that we had to keep our laws in order for us to have our salvation. So our people started to call themselves Marranos, so that because during this time, this was like the rise of Christianity and Catholicism. They was forcing people to change their religion, and if you didn't want to change your religion, they was either going to kill you on sight or kill you. I mean, they ain't no other or. It was like, you got to get rid of you if you ain't trying to conform to this religion. So our people tried to cover it up and say that they was Christians and try to keep portions of the Bible on the low. But you could do that research when you look into the Marranos. But nevertheless, I bring this out to say that the Sephardic Jews, when you Google it, they're going to show you a whole bunch of white people. This ain't white history. This is black history. This is Latino history. So when you look at it, when you think of Iberian people and the Marrano and the persecutions that was happening, just know that, that was our people getting persecuted. So when you look at these last names having Iberian origins, it's direct connection to those that came from, the tribes of Israel. So these names have Iberian origins, and Iberian origins are directly from, the Israelites of the Bible, letting you know that we're talking about the people of color and not the people of the red people. So let's go to the next slide. So nevertheless, to conclude this whole segment of it, so due to all of the different minglings with the different nations, we began to take on their genes, and we began to take on their features. And after time, we began to take on their customs and, stepping further and further away from the Most High. But nevertheless, all of these genes are stored within our DNA, but you still are what your father is at the end of the day. But this is why the scripture tells us that we shouldn't get too caught up in genealogy, because so many like crazy things has happened to our people, and it's gonna be hard to 100% identify somebody just by how they look, just because of their last name or just where they come from. So, the Bible give us, wisdom as far as dealing with these types of situations. Let's get that First Timothy.
1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 4. Neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which minister questions rather than godly edifying, which is in faith. So do.
If you get too caught up in like, all right, trying to look into genealogy, you're gonna end up confused. 'Cause it's gonna give you a whole bunch of unknown answers, a whole bunch of assumptions, a whole bunch of I just don't know, or I can't fully accurately 100% say that this is the case. So the scripture says don't get caught up all in that, because it's just a whole bunch of confusion. And our God is not a God of confusion. He's like, I made stuff simple for y'all, and I'm gonna tell y'all how to do it if y'all gonna be struggling just looking into the physical appearance of things. Go to that next scripture.
1 John 4 and 1. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirit whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world.
So even though you can't directly identify people by their appearance and their names and all this other stuff, that's why the scripture says, test the spirit by the spirit. Because like we said earlier, the Most High made different genes. He said we gave different manners of people. Only Israel is going to do certain things that the other nation are not going to do. So that's why they said, test the spirit by the spirit. Prove your friends. Make sure that, all right, like you have a sense of loyalty, or you have a sense of, only Israel is going to pretty much serve the Most High in sincerity and truth and accurately. Other nations, you read that in the Apocrypha, they say you'll never find an account of a heathen doing that. So, that's not a common thing that's going to happen with other nations. That's something that only Israel is going to be able to do. So last part, before we go into the next section, is that in order to really identify Israel, we're going to look into Israel's history, because we know their history. We're going to look into the prophecies and the things that are going to happen to these people. And then also, like I said, we got to look into see how accurate and how sincere these people will follow their God. We'll end it with this Romans 9 and verse 1.
Romans 9 and verse 1. I say the truth in Christ, I lie not. My conscience also bearing me witness in the Holy Ghost, that I have great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart, for I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh.
He said, my people according to the flesh. We're talking about that DNA still. I come from the people that have my same lineage. Not no converts, not no people that look like us. Like, nah, direct people of my lineage. Go ahead.
Who are Israelites.
And to be specific, who are the Israelites? Go ahead.
To whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of God, and the promises, whose are the fathers, and of whom, as concerning the flesh, Christ came.
It's, again, concerning that flesh that Yahushua came. So knowing that you're Israel, you probably wonder why we even going into this. There's importance of why to know your identity, but then there's so many things that was already promised into this people that how would you going to get your inheritance if you don't even know you got the inheritance? So it's like you got to get connected to it and get closer to the Most High so that you can receive the things that he got for you. He said we are a special people. So only way you're going to be able to understand that you are a special people is to get back in tune with your culture, get back in tune with your identity, get back in tune with the Most High, and then so that we don't have to suffer all of the ways that we've been suffering. Go ahead.
Who is over all? God bless forever. Amen. Not as though the word of God have taken none effect, for they are not all Israel, which are of Israel.
So again, remember we talked about that Y chromosome. People, A lot of people was try to say that, yeah, my mama's black. That means I'm black. I don't know. You know. But nevertheless, he said, man, all of Israel is not going to always be of Israel. No matter how identical you look to us, we always got to stay focused on that spirit and how that spirit is going to dwell when it comes to keeping these laws and their identity. Go ahead.
Neither because they are all the seed of Israel, the seed of Abraham, are they all children. But in Isaac shall thy seed be called. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God. But the children of the promise are counted for the seed.
So yeah, just to sum it all up, there is something special as far as being a Latino. There is something special as far as being black. There is something special about being Native American, because at the end of the day, we are the 12 tribes of Israel. So go back all the way from the beginning when we first started the presentation. Who remember the three major diaspora that was a mystery throughout all of history? Anybody remember them three? Africa, Israel, and the diaspora, the Latino people. The main reason why this was a big mystery is simply because they're all one and the same. They just went by different names. And of course, they're not about to sit there and just tell us that, because there's so much power that comes within it. So you go back to the slide. Yash. So that concludes as far as the, so we get off. So we say all of this to just making sure that everybody understand that the Latinos are very well just as much as Israel as the black people, and that there's responsibilities and things that we must hold, understanding that information and that identity. So to further prove this, Asha's gonna go into some more information just to further prove that, the Latinos are still fulfilling prophecies that are going to happen to the nation of Israel.
All praises, all praises. So the brothers already covered a whole lot, right? You guys are following, I hope. So now, as the PowerPoint states, bonus information. So, bringing it home even more than we would already did. So these are the curses of the Israelites recorded in Deuteronomy 28. Go ahead. It says, Deuteronomy 28:33, the fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always. Look at this. This is from the book Open Veins of Latin America, page 60 and 61. And what this is going to cover is various different countries of Latin America and how the Edomites, the Europeans, pretty much took advantage and, pretty much dried them up from the resources, abused of all these people, nothing than the, whatever you see in this present day. So go ahead and read that out.
The Northeast was Brazil's richest area and is now its poorest. In Barbados and Haiti, human ant heaps live condemned to penury.
So what it's saying right here, we're covering Brazil, right? The Northeast, which was, I don't know if you guys recall the Delta, Goshen, right? When we were sent into Goshen, why was the Most High, why did he place us there? It was the most fertile, right? The most fruitful. So right here, the same thing in Brazil. It said it was the richest place. In Barbados and Haiti, it said, where these locations, they were rich in all kinds of resources and minerals. Mind you, if you just look at Puerto Rico, it's translated to rich port. They said they found kids playing with golden marbles when they arrived, Imagine that. Exactly, they had all these riches, and our people were looking at it like, the materialistic state of mind that the Europeans brought out here. So these places were rich, and now they were in pretty much dirt conditions, living in impoverished situations. Go ahead.
In Cuba, sugar became the master key for U.S. domination at the price of the monoculture and the relentless impoverishment of the soil.
So look at this. Now we're talking about the U.S., right? We're talking about the Spaniards, the French, Germans, all these people, all these other nations that the brother Kabash brought out. But now it's the U.S. involvement. So it's saying the U.S. for them when they came into these places, it says in Cuba, sugar became the master key for their domination. So if you look at any country, agriculture, right? Their agriculture consists of different fruits and different vegetation. What you see right here with monoculture, they basically got rid of everything and made sure that the majority of the land was being used to crop sugar cane. You look at Haitians, they were under that captivity, under that slavery, under that bondage, and you had Cuba serving the same way. Go ahead.
And this has not been the role of sugar alone. The story has been the same with cacao, which made the fortunes of the Caracas oligarchy.
So now we in Venezuela. So we went from Cuba to Venezuela. So when you start understanding history, why they consider themselves, what do you call it? Cuba and Venezuela were, what's the term? Communist countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Communist countries. You talk to Venezuelans and you talk to Cubans, they pretty much feel like brethren, right? Like brothers. Literally, they could relate a whole lot. Anytime you talk to some Cubans and some Venezuelans, you'll see that. But then it goes all the way back. Because guess what? They were going ahead and pretty much taking advantage of all our minerals since day one. Again, we're bringing this right here. This is the days of the U.S., when the U.S. was in power. So it's saying they went ahead, they took the sugar, now they're doing cacao. Cacao is, what is it used for? Chocolate. Just think about the chocolate industry, right? See's Candy. Who owns that? It's not our people. Hershey, Nestle. And when you look at these things, who came and pretty much set these things up? Who invented these goods? It was always our people. But we're not benefiting of it, right? Which is what the scripture said. And we're not covering all the curses in Deuteronomy 28, just a few, but you guys that are aware of what the curses consist of, you can see it throughout this whole paragraph right here. Continue on.
With the spectacular rise and fall of cotton in Maranhão,
So that's Brazil.
with the Amazonia rubber plantation, which became the cemeteries of the northeastern workers recruited for a few pennies.
Imagine that.
With the devastated Quebracho forest in northern Argentina.
Hold up. So it says these places where they were hired to work for pennies became their cemeteries. So they were using them, burning them out, disposing of them. Think about that. Nothing's changed, though. And as we go further into this, you're going to see how Esau's been relentless and how Hebrews 12 and 16 relates, as no other individual, no other nation in this world has been more profane than these heathens. Go ahead.
With the devastated Quebracho forest in northern Argentina and Paraguay, with the Yucatan's Henequen plantation, where Yaqui Indians were sent for extermination, it is also the story of coffee, which advances, leaving deserts behind it.
Think about it. So the Henequen, it derives from the agave plant, right? So it was used for shoes, it was used for bags, hammocks, all kinds of things. What was before that? All right, now in coffee as well. When you look at Central America, for example, Central America, there was a civil war that lasted plenty of years, like about 2 decades. When you look at all these places, they all been affected by the U.S. involvement and pretty much Esau's abuse that they have partaken of with all the Latin American countries. So remember, we're going back to the curses. Because a lot of people out here in the Americas say that the curses have never affected Latin Americans. Or they might just identify them as Mexicans, right? But we're reading about this. Go ahead, continue on.
And of the fruit plantations in Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, and the unhappy lands of Central America. Each product has come to embody the fate of countries, regions, and peoples. And mineral-producing communities have, of course, traveled the same melancholy road. The more a product is desired by the world market, the greater the misery it brings to Latin American people whose sacrifice creates it.
Exactly. So what I was looking for was rubber, right? They talked about the rubber. Goodyear, Firestone, you name it, you continue on. But ain't that what the scripture said, though? We were going to go and one of all things unto who? The other nations. A nation that the Most High said he didn't regard it even as a people. But that's to show you and proving how these curses are and have always and only affected the seed of Israel. Go ahead. So it says, Deuteronomy 28:36, the Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. Go ahead. So this is from 15:10. It's called the requerimiento, the requirement. And as the brother reads into it, you're going to see how wicked Esau has always been. So, mind you, they came. The brothers cover how they knew Christopher Columbus through that movie, right? 1492. You guys could go scope it out. And they knew. We had maps also that show the map that he was using from the Portuguese people that spoke Hebrew, that were Israelites, that he brought in his voyage, knowing that he was going to come and meet up with the seed of Israel. So knowing all that, they still did this. Go ahead, Ak.
The overview of the requerimiento, the requirement, was written in 1510 by the Council of Castile to be read aloud as an ultimatum to the conquered Indians in the Americas. It asserted the religious authority of the Roman Catholic Pope over the entire earth and the political authority of Spain over the Americas, except Brazil, from the 1493 papal bull that divided the Western Hemisphere between Spain and Portugal. It demanded that the conquered peoples accept Spanish rule and Christian preaching or risk subjugation, enslavement, and death.
Exactly, and as you can see, right, it made a difference. Brazil was under Portugal rule. Every other country was under Spain. So it said, with the exception of Spain. But then it says they gave them, it's an ultimatum. After they already came and conquered the land, they're giving them this ultimatum, which the brother's going to go into right now, and is saying that it's coming from the Pope, which was, according to what they're saying, the head and the one that was representing the Most High. Go ahead, Ak.
Often,
look, it says risk of subjugation, enslavement, and death. As we're going to see in a minute, there was no choice but death. Go ahead.
Often, the requerimiento was read in Latin to the Indians with no interpreters present, or even delivered from shipboard to an empty beach.
Y'all recall Mordecai, right? And Esther. They did a decree, and there was many decrees that were written in the book of the Maccabees. That's where we just celebrated dedication. This was pretty much the same thing. They're like, you know what? We're going to write this decree out called the requerimiento, the requirement, and we're going to take it to these people. And they're going to have to bow down or face death. So they're saying they brought it and spoke and read it to them in Latin. Deuteronomy 28:49, it says that we were going to be conquered by some people whose language we were not to understand. It's proving it to you right there. But then besides that, they did what else? Or even
delivered from shipboard to an empty beach, revealing its prime purpose as self-justification for the Spanish invaders.
So imagine you are to be told the message, and this message is just tossed somewhere in your city, somewhere in the empty beach, right? So just showing you their whole thing was just to clear up on their end, legalities, as they do in this present day, but at the same time, they were going to go ahead with whatever they had already planned. Go ahead, Ak.
Of all these nations, this is from the requerimiento, of all these nations, God our Lord gave charge to one man called St. Peter, that he should be Lord and superior of all men in the world, and all should obey him, and that he should be the head of the whole human race, wherever men should live, and under whatever law, sect, or belief they should be. And he gave him the world for his kingdom and jurisdiction, and he commanded him to place his seat in Rome, as the spot most fitting to rule the world from. But also he permitted him to have his seat in any other part of the world, and to judge and govern all Christians, Moors or Muslims, Jews, Gentiles, and all other sects.
So you see this, right? You see this in the Bible? We don't read about this in the Bible, right? When the Most High set up the Pope, he set up Peter. And that's a whole other topic which we kind of covered last night. But you could look at the two Babylons, right? And it talks about Peter and how he was set up. And it wasn't even Peter that was being represented, but the interpreter of all their wickednesses. So this is what the Pope represents. But right here, they're telling the Indians, look, this is who your God set up as being the ruler of all the people, right? But again, remember, these people knew who these Indians, so-called Indians, were. So just showing you how it makes sense with Job 9 and 24, how the earth was given into the hand of the wicked. Psalms 83, with the brothers brought out earlier, is all connecting, right? Go ahead.
The men who lived in that time obeyed St. Peter and took him for Lord. Oh, Salakia. This man was called Pope, as if to say, admirable, great father, and governor of men. The men who lived in that time obeyed that St. Peter and took him for Lord, king, and superior of the universe. So also they have regarded the others who after him have been elected to pontificate, and so has it been continued even till now, and will continue till the end of the world.
And if you guys were raised Catholic, I'm pretty sure some of my people up in here know about Catholicism. Our people still believe this garbage. Our people still say, guess what? When we out there in the streets, man, we go at it with them. They're like, guess what? Nah, what you're making up is lies. Although we're coming out straight from the book. They said Peter was set up as the head of the Catholic Church, and therefore Catholic is the religion of the Most High, the religion that we're supposed to be following. But again, they said it right here, continue even till now and will continue till the end of the world. Catholic stands for what? Universal, right? So it's the universal religion. But I'm bringing this up and bringing this out so you could kind of like understand, get a better understanding when you're talking to different peoples, right? Whether it's your Puerto Ricans, your Cubans, your Dominicans, for the most part, all our people got hit by this right here. Remember, we had no choice. It was either, what, subjugation, imprisonment or whatever, or death. But as you're going to see in a minute, there was no choice. Go ahead.
But if you do not do this,
Look at this. Listen to this closely. Go ahead.
and maliciously make delay in it, I certify to you that with the help of God, we shall powerfully enter into your country and shall make war against you in all ways and manners that we can, and shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the church and of their highness. We shall take you and your wives and your children, and shall make slaves of them, and such shall sell and dispose of them as their highness may command. And we shall take away your goods, and shall do you all mischief.
Look at that, right? And so
damage.
besides what we just read, what the brother just read, he said, and shall do you all this mischief. Go ahead.
With the help of God. All this mischief and damage that we can, and to the vassals who do not obey and refuse to receive their Lord and resist and contradict him. And we protest that the deaths and losses which shall accrue from this are your fault, and not that of their highness or ours, nor of these cavaliers who come with us, and that we have said this to you and made this requisition. We request the notary here present to give us his testimony in writing, and we ask the rest who are present that they should be witness of this requisition.
This requirement, right? So you can see nothing changed, right? Just the same way they did the Constitution. All men are created equal, except the so-called black man is what? 3/5? And the Indian is not even considered an animal. That's in the U.S. This is before the U.S. This is under Spain, right? But you're going to see how it all connects. Nothing switched, man, because it's the same wicked devil ruling the earth, which is, the nation of Edom. So Deuteronomy 28:59 through 61, it reads, Then the Lord will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance, and sore sickness, and of long continuance. Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Egypt, which thou was afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. Go ahead. Read that up.
The burden of disease in Latin American countries is significantly different from the other regions and other low and middle income countries in particular.
So again, pay attention to this. So besides all, in regards to all the third world countries, it's talking about Latin America being worse as far as, plagues and stuff like that. It's affected worse. It's worse than all the other third world countries, right? And he's going to go into a couple of statistics. Go ahead.
In Latin American countries, non-communicable diseases are 13 to 16% percentage points higher than in any other region, accounting for 66.7% of deaths and 65% of disability adjusted life years or dailies. Central Mexico is the most intensively studied region regarding the impact of European diseases.
Of what?
Of European diseases on indigenous demography.
So remember, when you look, brothers brought up pyramids, right? But if you ever like searched out how these things were laid out, me and the brother got to go to Machu Picchu back in 2005. There's still running water till this day. That's coming from the Urubamba River that connects with the Amazons, right? Which is thousands of feet below the pyramid. But yet there's water that's running there. Because guess what? Our people, according to scriptures, when you look at Isaiah 3, it's off of a couple of books as well. It talks about how clean our people were. You read it earlier. When our women were in their cycle, they were separate, right? According to scriptures. Bathing and all that was something that every tribe would partake of. When you look at the Europeans, how did they come through with the smallpox? Exactly, nasty, like the sister said. It was, when you look, even when you go back to the Moors, right, in Granada. Granada was the first city that actually had electricity. Again, those people were Jews, our ancestors. The heathens, the Europeans, man, they were plagued with all kinds of diseases because what? They're dirty. They've been dirty. They still dirty, right? So you look at this right here, it's telling you when they got hit in central Mexico, this is where Cortez came in. Cortez hit this place, and as you're going to read in a minute, you're going to see what happened. But go ahead, Ak.
Where in 1520 there lived an estimated 25 million native peoples. In 1620 there lived some 730,000.
Imagine that.
A decline of 97%.
In a century, right? 97%. And then when you go back again into the devastation of the Indies, it stated that in Jamaica, when Jamaica got hit, when the Caribbean islands were hit, within 3 months, it was millions of people that got exterminated. 3 months. This is 100 years right here. But again, it was a 97% decline in the population. Go ahead.
Attributed overwhelmingly to disease. Similar catastrophes unfolded across the hemisphere. The most precipitous decline is thought to have occurred in the Caribbean, where the pre-contact indigenous population of several millions had been all but exterminated by the 1550s.
Imagine that. The whole Caribbean got hit. That's how quick a lot of our people were. You know, the genocide that nobody talks about, right? Nobody brings this up, but it's written in and documented in the books. But again, one thing we can't forget is, remember, the Most High said, these things we opened up, these are the curses. They were going to cleave unto us due to our disobedience, right? But go ahead, Ak.
Cortez, with his 500 men, then headed into Mexican interior. This region was home to the Aztec civilization, an empire of an estimated 16 million people at this time.
Exactly. So Cortez, once he got to Mexico, he had already gone through the Caribbean. He had already gone and decimated our people in the Caribbean Ocean, right? Now he in Mexico. Go ahead.
Through a system of conquest and tribute, the Aztecs had established a great island city of Tenochtitlan in Lake Texcoco that ruled over an area of about 80,000 square miles.
Imagine, 80,000 square miles, which is modern day the capital of Mexico, El DF, or the city of Mexico, right? And this is where Cortez came in, right? And it was a big place that it was 3 tribes, if I'm not mistaken, that the Aztecs consisted of that resided here, right? But look at what happened. Go ahead, Ak.
Although Cortez was a skilled leader, he and his force of perhaps 1,000 Spaniards and indigenous allies would not have been able to overcome a city of 200,000 without help.
So it was 200,000 against how many?
Oh, I'm sorry, against 1,000.
Think about that. 200, right? So, but then when you look at the same example that you think of when you look at the slave ships, it was hundreds and thousands of black folks, right? And a couple of Edomites.
Right.
But again, remember the Most High set that spirit upon our people. You read about it in Deuteronomy 28, fear, which we were not supposed to have. But due to our disobedience, this is what happened. So it was, again, what, read that again? 1,000 versus
He and his force
200,000,
of
right?
perhaps 1,000 Spaniards and indigenous allies would not have been able to overcome a city of
Go back to the
200,000
PowerPoint. Huh?
without help. He got it in the form of a smallpox epidemic that gradually spread inward from the coast of Mexico and decimated the densely populated city of Tenochtitlan in 1520, reducing its population by 40% in 1 year.
1 year, 40%. Again, why? Because the smallpox that he brought with the Spaniards, right? And you could read the whole you could read the history on it. But you see this. These are images of our people still getting hit with these plagues. Think about the stuff that just happened in 2019 to 2021, right? These are the same plagues of Egypt that we fear. But imagine, the brother was breaking it down. Philippines get hit, right? The Ghana, Haiti. But then last night we were still partaking of all these pagan customs, New Year's. Pissing off the Most High even more, right? Go ahead with the next one. Curses, right? Deuteronomy 28:48. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. Let's not forget that. We constantly want to blame the enemy, but we're our biggest enemy, right? Because look at this right here, right? For example, these are all presidents, dictators, leaders of Latin America. Look close. What do they look like? Do they look like brothers? The majority of them? No. Look close, man. There you got some Germans, you got Spaniards, you got Europeans all in that. I mean, look at the first one. He looks like a straight, Confederate, right? And you go down the line, then you have a couple of, Israelites mingle within there. But you look at this. It says, most leaders of Latin America have always followed the interests of the U.S. The Western Hemisphere seemed a natural sphere of U.S. influence, and this view had been institutionalized in the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. I remember Monroe, right, one of the presidents of the U.S. So 1823, warning European states that any attempt to extend their systems to the Americas would be viewed as evidence of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States itself. So they're basically telling Europeans, because now our people were able to free themselves from the Spaniards, from the French, from the Portuguese and so forth, right? But now the U.S. is in the mix. So the U.S. is telling these European forces, these European nations, that they had to stay out of the way of Latin America because it wasn't for their. It was going to be considered an unfriendly approach, right? So then they called the Latin American countries our friendly neighbors when you look at the whole doctrine of Monroe, right? But then this is what happens. It says, on the other hand, the United States later used the doctrine to justify paternalism and intervention, basically ruling over these countries. This posed trouble for the Latin Americans, since a United States was strong enough to protect them from Europe, was also strong enough to pose threat itself. So, kind of like the Maccabees when you read the book of the Maccabees, right? They got away from a certain ruler, but then the next people came through. And that's been the story of you look at the book of Judges, right? But the same thing happened here. So you got a couple of the brothers right here, Pedro A. Campos, right? He was the Puerto Rican president, the nationalist president, right? And he was against the U.S. and their colonization, system that they had going. And guess what happened to Puerto Rico? They got conquered, and now it's not a state, right? It's a territory. It's a territory of the U.S. But when you look at the condition, you look at Trump, how he was treating them when, the earthquake, right? But you look at that. So this brother right here, he was fighting, and he was incarcerated for 80-something years. They let him free, and then they set up a plot, kind of like Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, and got him locked him up again. You see a lot of our brethren still locked up till this present day, indigenous, and I know that's another presentation, but when you look into that, you still got brothers that are serving time for crimes that they did not commit. You know, always orchestrated by the U.S. All these people right here, they got a lot of these dictators and presidents, they have a lot of blood in their hands. You know, it says right here, so Pedro A. Campos, he was a Puerto Rican president that was against the U.S. Arthur Schomburg, he was also a brother from Puerto Rico, which when you look him up, he was the one that started the pretty much the universities for black folks. A brother from Puerto Rico. I think in that poet, remember that brother brings it out. Yeah, so then we have Hugo Chavez, which he's on the top right. He was a president from Venezuela. You got a documentary that breaks the U.S. Edomites are breaking down how many times they try to poison him, and they finally killed him. But remember, according to the U.S., he was a bad president. If you recall, Venezuela is known for their gas, for their oil, rich in oil, just like Saudi Arabia and them, right? But then the U.S. said something as kind of like an embargo to not take oil from this country. I don't know if you guys keep up with Venezuela. It's in a bad predicament. It's been in a bad predicament for years, to the point that sisters were cutting their hair just to feed their kids, right? Sending it out here to your Moabites. That's slang it to our people, right? But you go back into that. That was Hugo Chavez. He was killed by the U.S. Zapata and Pancho Villa that actually fought in the Mexican Revolution. Them brothers as well. They were taken out by the U.S. armies. So when you go down the line, anybody that was trying to fight for our people was either incarcerated or put to death. Which, again, the Most High said he was going to send a people that wasn't us to rule over us. Go to the next slide. Gotcha. The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth, and thy carcasses shall be meat unto all fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall buy you or shall redeem you. Fray them away. Fray them away. So this is the devastation of the Indies, page 72. I'm not going to talk too much on it. Let, the book tell you what it was, but it was pretty bad. And we're going to go after this. We're going to go into some footage so you guys can capture what the book was talking about. Go ahead up.
Thus, with massacres and other outrages that laid waste in the kingdom extending for more than 100 square leagues, a land that had been among the most flourishing and populous in the whole world. This very same tyrant has written that the land of Guatemala was even more populous than Mexico, which is the truth. But he and his brothers and other Spaniards have slain 4 or 5 million souls in 15 or 16 years, from the year 24 to the year 40. They are still killing and destroying those who survive, and they will go on killing.
Look at that, 4 to 5 million souls in a couple of years. Went to the Caribbean, went to Mexico, and now we're in Central America. Go ahead.
Page 73. The Spaniards broke up marriages, separating husbands and wives, robbed couples of their children, took for themselves the wives and daughters of people, or gave them to sailors and soldiers as consolation.
Imagine that, right? So our people out here know about the Willie Lynch letter, right? 1712, which was written and it was orchestrated by a British slave owner. This is prior to that. He came from Jamaica. So who do you think he was using those methods on? It's telling you right here, the Spaniards broke up marriages, separating husbands and wives, right? Robbed couples of their children, and so forth. So the same things that they were operating in the Americas and Latin America and the Caribbean, he wrote that book, and he said, if you execute this properly, it was going to be good for 300 years, if not 400 or 500, which, as you can see, is still in effect, right? So, again, this is about the 1600s, 1712, back out here in America. I think it was Virginia or something like that, Massachusetts, something like that, right? They brought it forth and, used the same methods that they were using with the Latin American people. You could also look at Hitler's writings, the concentration camps that they had in Germany. They use the same methods that they use on the Latin, American people. But go ahead,
And the sailors bore them away on their vessels that were crowded with Indians, all of them dying of hunger and thirst. And truth to say, if one wanted to tell about this in detail or to describe all the cruelties perpetrated, It will make a big book that would horrify the world.
That's why it's called Devastation of the Indies, a brief account. A brief account. He said, if we were to write of everything, remember, this book was written by Bartolome de las Casas, a friar that was rolling with Columbus, all the Spaniards, right? So he was an eyewitness to all these things. And he just said, look, if we were to write about everything, man, it'd be endless. Go ahead. So Deuteronomy 28, 41, 68, 41, thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. The Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way wherefore I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Go ahead.
Devastation of the Indies, page 80. However, gold could be made for those bodies and souls for whom Jesus Christ died.
Look at the hypocrisy in that, right? Jesus Christ died for these Jews, yet they want to go ahead and set up their gods on our people. But then it says gold could be made of these bodies. How?
And the Spaniards assembled all the Indians they had allowed to survive and sent them away on the many ships.
On what?
On the many ships.
They never been on ships, right?
On the many ships.
Again, proven Deuteronomy 28, 68. It all relates, man. Our people were taken from here to Spain, brought back as our people from West Africa were being brought out here to the Americas, to South Santo Domingo, to Cuba, and so forth, right? Go ahead.
Assembled all the Indians they had allowed to survive and sent them away on many ships that came, attracted by the smell of slaves. They will be traded for wine and vinegar and pigs and clothing and for horses or anything else needed by the tyrant and his followers, or what they deem necessary.
Think about that. Think about your children just getting picked up and being traded for pigs or clothing, right? Or a bottle of wine, some oil. That's what was happening with our forefathers, right? Go ahead.
And the Spaniards were allowed to choose among 150 Indian maidens the ones they liked best.
So going back to what Kabash was bringing up, right? How did the people end up looking a certain way? So this is against their will. And again, while these different countries were and have still been residing amongst us, everything has switched up, right? The way our people look is due to these incidents that happen and continue to happen. But now imagine, they were able to pick from 50 Indian maidens, right, whatever they wanted. And the price, as you can see, it was for nothing. Go ahead.
Paying for each one in a robe of wine or oil or vinegar or pigs.
Imagine, they were, okay, a little bottle of wine, you know what, I want a couple of sisters. They took them, and you already know what they were doing with them, right? Continue on.
And the same for a comely boy, chosen from among 1 or 200. And it sometimes happened that a boy who appeared to be the son of a noble would be traded for a whole cheese, and 100 of them for a horse.
Imagine an individual, a son of a special family, of a noble family, he was worth the whole cheese. Remember, they were in ships, so now they're in Italy. They're in Spain, they're in Portugal, they're in Africa. They're all around the Mediterranean. So it's not like they're out here. So now our people are getting sold and traded out there for whatever nonsense the brother just read. So this is how our brothers ended up back in Europe and so forth. Go ahead.
The devastation of the Indies. One day, and this incident happened either in the kingdom of the Yucatan or New Spain, a certain Spaniard went hunting for stags and rabbits, and finding no game and wanting to satisfy his dogs, he took a baby from its Indian mother, and with his sword sliced off the child's arms and legs for the dogs to share. Then after that meal, on those pieces of flesh, he threw down the little body for all the dogs to share.
Right. I'm telling you, read the book. It's a quick read. These are only a couple of pages that the brother's covering, that we're covering. But think about that. Your baby being ripped off your breast, chopped up, and tossed to the dogs because there was no game found that day. Imagine that. So Deuteronomy 28:32, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto other people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. Ain't that what we just read about? Right? Go ahead.
Devastation of the Indies, page 77. One Spaniard took a maiden by force to commit the sin of flesh with her, dragging her away from her mother, finally having to unsheath his sword to cut off the woman's hand. And when the damsel still resisted, they stabbed her to death.
Right. Go ahead with the next clip, Buck. So right here, it's we're gonna watch some footage of the devastation of the Indies, as well as other things that have taken place.
Yet into this sheepfold, into this land of meek outcasts, there came some Spaniards who immediately behaved like ravening wild beasts, wolves, tigers, or lions that had been starved for many days, killing, terrorizing, afflicting, torturing, and destroying the native peoples, doing all this with the strangest and most varied new methods of cruelty, never seen or heard of before, and to such a degree that this island of Hispaniola, once so populous, having a population that I estimated to be more than 3 million, has now a population of barely 200 persons. Their reason for killing and destroying such an infinite number of souls is that the Christians have an ultimate aim, which is to acquire gold and to swell themselves with riches in a very brief time and thus rise to a high estate disproportionate to their merits. It should be kept in mind that their insatiable greed and ambition, the greatest ever seen in the world, is the cause of their villainies. And also those lands are so rich and felicitous, the native people so meek and patient, so easy to subject, that our Spaniards have no more consideration for them than beasts. No, for thanks be to God, they have treated beasts with some respect, I should say instead like excrement on the public squares. The Indians began to seek ways to throw the Christians out of their lands. They took up arms, but their weapons were very weak and of little service in offense and still less in defense. The Christians, with their horses and swords and pikes, began to carry out massacres and strange cruelties against them. They attacked the towns and spared neither the children, nor the aged, nor pregnant women, nor women in childbed, not only stabbing them and dismembering them, but cutting them to pieces as if dealing with sheep in the slaughterhouse. They made some low, wide gallows on which they hanged victims' feet almost touched the ground, stringing up their victims in lots of 13 in memory of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles, then set burning wood at their feet and thus burned them alive. When tied to the stake, the cacique, or chieftain, Hatway, a very important noble, was told by a Franciscan friar about the God of the Christians and of the articles of faith, and he was told what he could do in the brief time that remained to him in order to be saved and to go to heaven. The chieftain, who had never heard any of this before, asked the Franciscan friar if Christians all went to heaven. When told that they did, he said he would prefer to go to hell.
Sote and the surrounding areas, one of the largest and most violent massacres.
See, that was from the devastation of the Indies, right? I hope you guys were listening. So you can see all the footage that they had right there was that they used to burn them at the stake by the number of 12 or 13. Why? Representing the apostles. Imagine that. Christ and his apostles. Then you look at, I don't know if you've seen the mounds of bodies that were in the background, showing you, imagine how bad it looked at that time when there was millions of people being put to death in months, right? Daily, thousands of people. So now this is going to go into something that happened, I believe it's 1932 in Central America. And again, it was orchestrated by the U.S. The war that happened in Central America in the 80s, reason why a lot of Salvadorians and Nicaraguenses and Hondureño people are out here, especially in Los Angeles, was due to this situation. They would come and they would get kids just like these little ones in the front, give them M16s and take them, put them to war with each other. Why? Because it was orchestrated by the American, government. Go ahead and
Latin America's recent history has yet to be brought to justice in the 37 long years since it occurred. Here is a short summary of the struggle for justice in this case. Despite the testimony of Rufina Amaya, the sole survivor of the massacre, who watched as her neighbors and relatives were cruelly murdered, forensic evidence, and documentation by international journalists, the Salvadoran government continued to deny the massacre took place. In 1990, the victims filed a criminal complaint against the state, but it was labeled communist propaganda and ignored. In December 2017, the Salvadoran government complied with the sentence from 5 years prior and released official statistics on the case. 1,725 total victims, survivors, and people affected, 988 people killed, of whom 551, or the majority, were minors. Even more shocking, 86% of the children killed were under the age of 12, and 44% were under the age of 6, too young to even handle a rifle. Furthermore, 12 unborn children were killed.
It was over 70.
The massacre of El Mozote is not only an offense against all Salvadorans, but also humanity, especially children. A sentence.
So in this war, there was over 75,000 people that were murdered, right? And they were murdered by the hands of other Salvadorians, or Nicaraguenses, or people from Honduras. Again, orchestrated by the U.S. So showing you and proving to you again the curses, how real they are, right? Go to the next one.
In the El Mozote case would reaffirm that children are not the targets of military campaigns.
The syphilis experiments in Guatemala were United States-led human experiments conducted in Guatemala from 1946 to 1948. The experiments were led by physician John Charles Cutler, who also participated in the late stages of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Doctors infected soldiers, prostitutes, prisoners and mental patients with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases without the informed consent of the subjects. The experiment resulted in at least 83 deaths. Serology studies continued through 1953 involving the same vulnerable populations in addition to children from state-run schools, an orphanage, and rural towns, though the intentional infection of patients ended with the original study. On October 1, 2010, the U.S. President, Secretary of State and Secretary of Health and Human Services formally apologized to Guatemala for the ethical violations that took place. Guatemala condemned the experiment as a crime against humanity, and a lawsuit.
Justice Initiative
So,
recently released.
Imagine, right? You guys are aware of what happened in Tuskegee, right? So once they were exposed, they said, "Oh, you know what? We can't do this out here in the States no more." They went to Guatemala and continue with the experiments, right? And what they received, the Guatemalan people, what they received was an apology, a formal apology. I think it was Clinton, and it's a couple of years ago.
What was crazy is, imagine you got somebody just going out because they can. Everybody just start getting. I'm gonna give all of y'all an STD. I'm just give all y'all syphilis. Why the hell not? Then everybody finds out. Now everybody's complaining. Man, I say, you know what? I'm gonna go on Facebook Live. Look, guys, I'm sorry. What I did was wrong. I shouldn't have did it. What's done is done. I can't take it back, but I'm sorry. That's all you get. You still got syphilis. But at least I said sorry. You gotta, this history is crazy. It's amazing.
But think about it, though. So he apologized, but then where are people at right now with the jab? Said, I'm sorry, but guess what? All of a sudden, guess what? We in a pandemic, and you guys need 1, 2, and a gang of boosters. And our people are running to get their little jabs, right?
And even though it's killing you, you still need to take it.
And you see it. You see it all, left and right. All these people that have passed due to that. But look at their history. It's been in many accounts, but our people still trust the enemy. When the scriptures tell you to do the opposite, right? But go ahead.
A groundbreaking report on lynchings of African Americans in the United States and found that nearly 4,000 documented lynchings occurred between the years 1877 to 1950. While the gruesome incidents of murder are well established in our history books, the total number of African Americans lynched is about 700 higher than previously thought. But that's not all. Another grisly chapter in American history is the lynching of Mexicans. In numbers second only to African Americans, thousands of Mexicans were reportedly lynched in the late 1800s to early 1900s. With little remaining documentation, the lynchings of 547 Mexicans have been verified, but the true number stands likely much higher.
All right, so you guys heard that, right? It's documented for all those naysayers that always got issues with so-called Mexicans or Latin Americans not fitting the curses. Man, we just touched a couple of situations that happened, a couple other things, just a few. All right, so all praises to the Most High. So how do we reverse our curses, right? How do we do it?
That's the question, because the whole purpose of this particular presentation is for two things. One is to show you who these people are, where these people come from, where these people originate, and why it matters. Kabaz touched on it earlier when he expressed the Romans 9. He said, this is why it even matters that you're Israel. It's because all of these things pertain to you. And then we read about these curses. These curses come from the disobedience that we have constantly done to the Most High God, which placed us in this predicament. So now the question is, how do we get out of these predicaments? How do we get out of these situations that went on in the devastation of the Indies, the syphilis experiment, the last hired, first fired, the impoverished conditions in Central and South America right now? How do we get out of those? We now understand who we are. And everyone who's anyone understands the importance of history. They say if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. So these people understood that this is something that we're trying to get our people to understand. If you don't understand where you came from, you won't understand where you're going. You won't understand your mission in life. You won't understand your purpose. So the scriptures tell you what it is that you're supposed to be looking to do once you find out who you are. We're in these predicaments, in this condition, for a particular reason. They're called curses, and they're a result of the lack of obedience to the Lord our God. So how do we reverse these curses? First and foremost, we must unite. That's one. We must unite. But unite under what? Are we just going to, hey, you know, I'm black, he's Hispanic, you're Native American, we just come together and that's it? No. We all unite under one constitution. We all unite under one way of life, one way of the ritual, the belief system, the laws, the rules that we're governed under. We have to unite under that. So as we close out this presentation, you now understand Central, South Americans, the historians say it, the archaeology proves it, they themselves say it. They are the descendants of the children of Israel. And now we also understand the importance of why it even matters that they're the descendants of the children of Israel. And in order to come into the position that we were once in, that we should be in, we have to unite, we have to get right, we have to repent and come back under the laws and the Constitution of the Most High God. That's it. Do we have any announcements?